Hello, friends. Welcome to Experience DataTalk, a show featuring data science leaders and technologists from around the world. My name is Mike Delgado, and this is episode number 128. And today we're honored to chat with Renée Cummings, CEO and founder of Urban AI. Renée is a brilliant and thoughtful artificial intelligence ethicist. She's a criminologist and community scholar at Columbia University. She's also the founding board member of the AI and Ethics Journal. Today we talk with her about the ways systematic racism and biased racial data has been used in artificial intelligence systems to hurt marginalized communities, and especially people of color. And look, this isn't a discussion just about fixing algorithms and having more empathy. It's about changing our mindsets. It's about changing our processes when designing algorithms and making sure that we have socially conscious, diverse teams that continually stay educated on the ways that AI models could be used to hurt and re-victimize specific communities. Renée not only talks about the problems, but also highlights the positive movement that data scientists are taking to reduce discrimination and racial bias as they design future algorithms. And that's what this episode is about. It's about how do we grow in empathy? How do we start asking better questions? And how do we build AI solutions that are going to help our communities? In today's show, Renée shares how racial bias in data has continued to hurt our Black and Brown communities. She also talks about active steps that data science teams can take to mitigate bias in AI system design, and also why it's important to challenge algorithms that are feeding off racially biased training data. And at the end, she shares books and resources that we should all check out to help us stay educated on the ways racism and bias creeps into artificial intelligence. Renée is on fire in this episode, and I am blessed for the opportunity to learn from her. Here's our conversation. Renée, welcome to Data Talk.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
So I've been following your LinkedIn work, and you have been just on fire lately, speaking at all these various workshops, speaking at AI ethics events. I saw that you just spoke at Columbia University, part of their scholar lecture series on police brutality and protesting and risking your life for justice during COVID-19. You have been super, super busy lately, and I just wanted to have you on the show. And first of all, just thank you for all your tremendous work to help reduce racial bias in AI. And as I was looking at your profile, I was just shocked at how much work you've done in this space, which for a lot of people has been pretty new. When people think about AI ethics, it seems like kind of a new field. But this is something you've been working on for a very, very long time. And I would like to go back to when you were studying criminal justice. I know that you started a criminal justice intelligence company almost 13 years ago, just showing how much work you've been doing. Can you talk a little bit about what led you to start working in criminal justice?
Certainly. So at the time, I was a substance abuse therapist at a treatment facility in New York, and most of my clients were coming out of the criminal justice system, and most of them were taking a program that took them out of the streets and into rehabilitation as a diversion program to sentencing. So I had all these individuals in front of me, and I was trying to work them through a place of recovery. And then I noticed everyone had something on their record. And I was looking for that correlation between substance abuse and criminal justice and ways in which I could work in that space, or at the intersection of that space. So I decided to enroll in a graduate program in criminal justice. And while I was there, I really fell in love with criminology and criminal psychology and forensics. And at the same time, I also did a master's certificate in terrorism studies in the psychodynamics of terrorism.
Wow.
So that was my background in criminal justice. And then I became a consultant, and I started to work with law enforcement agencies pretty much across the world, and focusing specifically on violent crime, homicide prevention and reduction, gun and gang violence reduction, sex crimes, juvenile delinquency and juvenile justice, and really ensuring the protection of children as well. So that's my background in criminal justice, pretty much in a nutshell.
That's awesome. And at what point did you start to realize AI ethics and racial bias was a big key to all of this?
Well, I think about 2 years ago, is when I started to realize that these risk assessment tools were being used in the criminal justice, the criminal justice context. And these tools were being used when it came to sentencing, when it came to parole. It was also being used as an assessment when individuals came into corrections, and just a big predictor when it came to public safety. And then I was looking at the kinds of data points and the kinds of questions we were asking, and I felt that there was something that just didn't feel right about these risk assessment tools, and deciding on a calculation or formula to let you know whether or not a human being had the potential to reoffend, or whether or not an individual who had served time was ready to re-enter society. And I felt there was something human missing from that. And I felt that there was this heavy over-reliance on science and mathematics, and people believing that because the risk assessment said so, that it was a neutral decision. It was an objective decision. And it had me wondering about the data that was being used, and whether or not data from a system that has been historically biased and prejudiced against Black and brown people would give you a non-biased decision on their fate and their future. And at the same time, ProPublica did an expose that looked at the criminal justice system, looked at how algorithms were rewriting justice or arraignment by algorithms. And the same questions that I was asking, the same questions were there. And it made me say that, wait a minute, but why isn't criminal justice speaking about it? The data scientists have started to talk about it. The journalists are talking about it, but we're not hearing the criminologists and the criminal justice specialists or the law enforcement specialists. Also, within that time, I was already speaking and training law enforcement on predictive analytics, intelligence-led policing, precision-led policing, and all these different data points that we were using to put cops and dots and to deal with hot spots, and to try to ensure that the resources, were they manpower or finances, were really being done in a way that would be efficient and effective when it came to policing. So many questions, so combined with the sentencing concerns and the over-policing of Black and brown communities and the denying of individuals parole, all of these things made me say, wait a minute. There's an ethical question when it comes to the application of an algorithm, particularly in a criminal justice context where it's about life and liberty. And someone had to step in and voice that. And while there were others doing it, I felt that criminal justice and criminology need to be represented, and criminologists have to play a critical role when it comes to co-designing the justice system using emerging and new and emerging technologies, digital technologies like artificial intelligence.
I think the big misconception is that people think that, well, just because you're using math or science, it's going to be objective. But to your point, if the data points that you're collecting in have been based on systematic racism and bias, that's going to impact the decisions that AI is going to be making. I'm curious about your conversations as you begin to discuss these really important issues with people in criminal justice.
Well, I didn't have an opportunity to discuss it with anyone in criminal justice. I actually Googled and saw how many criminologists are really speaking about this. And I saw that there was one criminologist out of one particular university, and he was looking at it more within the context of crime prevention and crime control. So how do we use these algorithms to, apprehend individuals who are about to commission a crime or who have commissioned a crime? And I felt that we needed a different type of approach, not only the predictive approach, but not only the preventive approach, but a more empathetic and compassionate approach, because what we were allowing an algorithm to do was to make a decision on someone's future and not allowing that individual to challenge the algorithm. Because a critical aspect of the criminal justice system is the ability to face your accuser. And if that accuser is an algorithm and there is a black box and there are questions about accountability and transparency and explainability, how does the individual who already feels so disempowered in the criminal justice system get the power to challenge an algorithm? And that's where I was very, very concerned. How do I demystify this data to allow individuals to know it is not a law unto itself? An algorithm is not a law, but it was being used as a law in the criminal justice system. And we had to think about that. So criminology was not really speaking about it in a term of advocacy, a term of let's be cautious. And I had to have those conversations with data scientists and other ethicists when it came to data and technology and AI, because the conversation was not happening in the criminology fraternity. It is happening now. And I'm hoping that that voice is amplified just a little more.
As you began to talk to data scientists and those in the technology fields about these really important issues, what were those conversations like? How was it received?
It was received because everyone started to speak about it. People were talking about it. People were looking at the power of the algorithm. They were now starting to question, is this an accountable and transparent approach? What about explainability? How do we detect risks and how do we mitigate against those risks? What are the ethical guardrails that we need to ensure what we're doing is really a safe approach to using this technology? What about the long-term sociological impacts of this technology? And who would be there to protect the future? So the conversation within the ethical fraternity of technology was really happening. And I think it was a critical time for me to step in, using my background in criminology, using some of the experiences I've had in the criminal justice system, and amplifying that call for empathy and compassion, and really deconstructing what was going on, and really allowing people to walk back in our own consciousness and say that if we come from a history of discrimination and bias that began with the enslavement of Black people on the plantations of America, then the data begins there. The data begins when they arrived. And when we look at the system of enslavement and we think about racism, we know it's a social construct, because when you look at the genetic diversity between the races, it's not that diverse to say that people are that different. So we're using a social construct, something like racism, that had an economic construct, that had a psychological construct, that had a political construct. And we've built a justice system on those constructs. And if we're pulling data from a system that has historically been biased. Now, our criminal justice system has had many great moments, many great advances, and there's been a lot of great things to celebrate about the criminal justice system. But there are a few things that we've got to think about, and algorithms, AI, in a space using that data that has been used to exclude people of color because of the inequalities, because of the inequities, because of the disparities that are baked into that data. We were really treading a deadly place, and we had to roll it back by ensuring there was an ethical voice speaking about the need for data vigilance and data consciousness and data activism. And I think that's the place where I exist.
And I feel like because of what you just said about all the problems with our data sources, the systemic racism, the amount of bias that's in the data, it's going to cause so many problems in the way that the data is being interpreted and how these decisions are going to be made. And I'm wondering, and I love how you talked about the empathy approach, and we need to have more empathy in this decision-making process. But right now, empathy is not part of like an AI. AIs don't have any sort of empathy. I'm just wondering, like, where do we go from here? How do we begin to start to move forward in a positive direction?
I think we're already moving forward in a positive direction because there are so many voices speaking about ethics in AI at this moment. So the movement has started. The empathy and the compassion is there because we have data scientists and ethicists and technologists who understand the work that needs to be done. So the work has started because we're having this conversation, you and I. So this is work that we're doing right here to raise awareness and to educate. AI doesn't design itself. It doesn't design itself. Technology is designed by a human, and that human brings his or her subconscious or implicit biases to the design process. Now, subconscious or implicit bias is so deeply ingrained in the human psyche that it is there, and sometimes we don't know it's there. And many times it is so automatic. It slips into a process or it slides into a process, and we don't know it has happened. So when you think about the imagination and what we use to create a concept, our imagination is also shaped by our biases and our prejudices. So by having these conversations, by amplifying the need for data scientists and designers and other technologists to be vigilant, to be conscious, it means that when they sit at the table, they're going to ask themselves some critical questions. It means that the checks and balances are going to be more rigorous. They're going to be more robust. So we know at the design table, if we have an inclusive team, if we have a diverse team, and if we have those questions that are internal, in our internal mechanism, that are asking us certain big questions as we design, what we've created there would be an internal risk assessment tool. And then when we have the external tools, technology itself, there are many individuals and companies designing algorithms and technological systems to check for bias. So if we have the internal checks and the external checks, and we have a diverse team, and across the life cycle, we have individuals and systems that are checking, we can get a product that is not perfect, but definitely a product that says, listen, we are conscious, we made some checks, we did the balancing, and this is what we've produced. But we are still open to be checked by our consumers. So it calls for thinking, it calls for stakeholder engagement, it calls for public education, and it calls for an understanding that we want to create something that is beneficial to all of us, but something that does not cause harm to any one group, or re-victimizes, or re-marginalizes, or profiles digitally, or we don't want to do that. What we want to do is something that protects as well as it has the potential to promote whatever it needs to promote to the widest audience to advance humanity, not roll us back, not for us to regress. It's about progress. It's about moving forward, but technically aware and socially conscious.
I love that. And I love what you said about the importance of having an inclusive table, having diverse people with different backgrounds who have an understanding of different issues in their own communities, because that's super, super important. And not only at the tech table, but also at the leadership table, the leaders that are making the decisions, like they need to be able to also be a diverse set of thinkers with diverse backgrounds to make sure that these products are also being budgeted appropriately and developed. Also, I think what you're saying here is the importance of awareness and staying educated on the issues. That also needs to be extremely important. And at my company, they are launching a bunch of different classes around racial bias, being aware of Black Lives Matter movement. And I recently took this quiz with my wife. It was around perceptions of mood of individuals. And the test was, it showed faces of people of all different backgrounds and would ask you to measure happiness level, sadness level, anger. And so I went ahead and did this quiz, and my results were terrible. I cannot read the mood of somebody. And I thought I did okay. I thought going through it that I would be doing okay. And my wife did it, and she did a great job. She was almost 90% predicted the actual mood of the person based on the facial expressions. And I did a terrible job. And we were talking about that. And that's just a small example of how bias can creep in, just our own mindset of how we're interpreting someone's facial expressions.
So let me take that a step further. Imagine if we were to design a criminal justice tool that looks at emotions. And we've been seeing that many individuals are trying to come up with that kind of instrument. If you think of Black and brown kids, and from working in the juvenile justice system, I can tell you, when a young Black or brown man is happy, he does not often have a big smile. He could give you a game face, because when you think of that whole concept of the the gang culture and, the showing of expression in the Black and brown community. It may not be elation and immediate joy, but you learn to read those expressions. So someone who may not be privy to that understanding may not understand or misdiagnose or misrepresent. The other thing they're trying to do is use algorithms to design our body language or the gait or the walk of a particular person to link that to criminality. When you think of culturally how people walk, Black and brown guys probably put a little more swagger in their walk. Is that because they are criminal? And we have had sociologists, great sociologists and criminologists, who showed us that young Black and brown men may walk a particular way when they're out of the community, and when they're coming home to a community that may be a high needs or high risk community, they may put the hood over their heads, they may change their walk because they have to look tough going home, right? So there's that whole, what does street life demand, What is that street code? There's a particular street code when they enter their community. So if you are using something like facial recognition that does emotion recognition and does body language, you can be totally off saying a young Black or brown kid looks criminal when he or she is just putting on a particular appearance to make them look tough going home, as opposed to when you see them on the streets of the university, in their university environment, in their high schools. So there's so many things that we've got to be wary and cautious of. And we can't be looking for this, sweep with one brush sort of broad-based approach to really detecting certain things, because as we try to be more expedient and to come up with these quick answers, what we can be doing is denying the rights of other individuals. And much of what we've seen in the criminal justice system have been civil rights and civil liberties issues. And we've got to be careful about using something like an algorithm or technology like AI that has the potential to do great good, but also to do great harm when it comes to civil liberties and democracies, your democratic rights and your rights just as a citizen. All of these things could be challenged and could be put in a crisis situation if we don't understand the technology we're using and how, powerful that technology is.
Have you seen any AI tools that are out there that you think are on the way of being a good way for us to be able to use AI in criminal justice?
There are some that are being used right now, particularly when it comes to looking at things like sexual assault and predicting sexual assault. We've seen some of the predictive analytics working really good there. When it comes to human trafficking and sex trafficking, we've seen algorithms doing a substantive and successful job there as well. Also, when it comes to these chatbots that have been used for victims of sexual violence, victims of trafficking, using in a sort of mental health / therapeutic way within the criminal justice system to start the conversations with individuals, because sometimes early in the game, particularly when you're a victim, you may not have that comfort level to sit with another human being because you are afraid of judgment. And I think in those early stages of really assessing the individual and trying to come up with a treatment plan for that person, AI works really nicely there as well. We've seen it in predictive analytics and predictive policing. It has done some good, but it is the application. Now, the design itself may be problematic because we have the data. Now, when you apply it, it also looks at who's doing the application. So it's like a double sort of jeopardy situation right there. But if it is applied in a way where there is that education and there's that consciousness and there's a disclaimer that comes with the tool saying, we've designed this, but these are the challenges. So these are the kinds of interventions you may need to use to supplement or to make this thing work more effectively. Because it's like, many times we see certain things on television being advertised, and then there's that disclaimer saying this is for entertainment purposes only. So you've got to protect yourself and let people know that this is what it can do. But I think too many of the designs or too many of the tools begin to overpromise. And when you start to overpromise, People start to rely on this thing, thinking that it is the next magic bullet that's going to reduce crime and criminality. And this is where we've got to be concerned, because when you are playing with someone's life, when you are making a high stake decision in the criminal justice system, you cannot chance it simply to a risk assessment tool or an algorithmic decision making system and say we've made a good decision.
Have you seen examples of those that maybe are working in the courts where the AI has determined that someone should not be on parole, that for some reason the AI is saying that this person needs to stay in jail until the court proceeding, and the judge overruled and said, actually, I think this AI is incorrect here. This person should be on parole?
No, I have not, and not because it doesn't exist, but because I don't work in the courts like that. And those cases are probably not made public because that information probably not shared yet. But what I have seen is really a particular situation that was very, very touching, with an individual trying to get parole, realizing that every time he faced the committee, he was being denied. And him being bold enough, Mr. Rodriguez, him being bold enough, and there is a documentary that's out on his situation, and him feeling empowered enough to challenge the risk assessment tool and challenge the vendor that created that tool, and him getting his freedom. And it was really, really a very emotional moment for him and for anyone who looked at that documentary. But I think what he has done with that documentary and with his own advocacy has really informed much of what we are seeing now when it comes to the criminal justice system, having that knowledge and being aware, and much of what we're seeing now with data ethics and AI ethics and journalists, and I think that consciousness is there and people are understanding, wait a minute, let's check and ensure that we're doing the right thing.
I know we have a big community of data scientists that listen to this show, and I know a lot of them are going to be nodding their heads and also wondering, what can I do as a data scientist as I'm working on some of these tools, some of these AIs? What would be some things you would tell them as they are in that design process, or as they are working on some of these solutions that are supposed to be helpful to the criminal justice system, or even helpful in business, and they want to make sure that they're doing the ethical thing by trying to reduce any sort of racial bias, trying to make sure that the AI is working properly and justly?
Well, the first thing I would say to them is really ask yourself, do I have an ethical approach to my design? And you've got to ask that question. And the other thing that you've got to do is ask yourself, what are my biases? What are my prejudices with a particular group? And it's not about looking at yourself in a negative way, because we all have biases. We all have prejudices. Sometimes we call them our preference. Some of us like a hamburger with onions. Some of us don't like onions. It's a bias. That's a bias right there to the onion. But it doesn't impact us in a negative way. So they've got to ask themselves, what are my biases? What are the things that make me uncomfortable? Is it when I see a man, a black or brown man, I think he's suspicious immediately? I think he's dangerous. Do I associate blackness or skins of color with danger, with fear? Ask yourself those questions, and then do the checks and balances. And while you're designing at every stage of the life cycle, pull a diverse team in. You work in a company. There are diverse people in there. Bring them in. Ask them questions. Let them, feel the technology out with you. Let them test it with you. So you bring that diverse group to the table. You ask the right questions. You let them question you. And I think you're going to come out with a better product. You're also probably going to get creative solutions, because many times our own thinking is a bit insular. And if we're designing something the way we think and the way we think it's supposed to be, and not understanding the kinds of prejudices we may have in there, we're undermining the process. So lively up the process. Get individuals in there. Have the open and honest conversation. Don't be offended by your biases. It's not about being offended. It's about being honest enough to know that, I'm happy that I got checked. I'm happy that I got checked, because the product that you are going to put out there is definitely going to be more tweaked, more fine-tuned, and definitely something that is more precise.
I love that. And I think also you got to have that mindset of wanting to grow and become a better human, because this is part of it. And that means having uncomfortable conversations, It means being checked, being analyzed, doing your own testing on yourself, getting educated. And that can be very, very uncomfortable.
Well, it is, but it's also better to be uncomfortable in the design room than be uncomfortable in the courtroom when you get the lawsuit or when you get the crisis or when your company now faces a reputation issue and when you have all of these data, ethicists and AI ethicists saying that this company produced a particular product. And we saw that with facial recognition in its early stages. We saw that with some of the hiring tools. We've seen it. We've seen that movie before. So why do you want to use that old script? Don't use that old script. Just create your new script. Script something that's going to make you feel, as though you've done the right thing. And that's what it's about, because we've been down that road before, and we know that road creates many, many, many obstacles. And you don't want to get yourself and your company there. So it comes back to the leadership as well. It comes back to the organization. It comes back to the ethical frameworks that are in place, whether or not ethics is just about window dressing or ethics washing, or whether or not they are really committed to an ethical approach to the work that's being done in the organization. And I think now, because of this movement, because there's been a moment of reckoning, because we've seen some of the big tech companies saying they're not moving forward with particular technologies because of the race, it's designed to amplify a racial bias, and they don't want to be seen as a company that is against social justice, or they want to be seen as a company on the right side of history. I think there are going to be more and more questions. And what I think I would like to see is that sustained questioning and that investment in more diverse teams, and that investment in understanding that the investment you make at the design table is really a greater investment for humanity.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying. And I think that I'm hoping that leaders that are listening in, take this to heart. And as they are developing their data science teams, that they're thinking about all the diversity that needs to be in the room, including bringing in ethicists, bringing in maybe philosophers, bringing in people from the communities to come in and chat and talk about what are the ways that this AI, this tool could be abused to hurt certain communities. What you're saying is we need to be asking more questions.
Definitely. And that's how you advance. That's what ethics is about. That's what philosophy is about. That's what data science is about. You're asking questions with the data. And that's what AI is about. You're asking a predictive analytic tool a question, and it's giving you a particular answer. So the design of an AI tool is very deliberate, because we've got to ask the tool deliberate questions to come up with the answer, which is the solution. So if you are asking the wrong questions, the solution is not going to be the accurate solution or the most accurate solution. So this entire technology is about asking questions. That's what AI is in every industry, from criminal justice to healthcare to finance. Look at how systemic racism has plagued finance and credit scores and education, and the redlining that we've seen that has now turned into digital redlining. And we've got to check ourselves. And we've got to question ourselves and saying, are we denying an entire, demographic access to wealth because of the tools that we use when it comes to insurance or credit scores or who's getting a loan or who gets a mortgage? What are we doing? What are we doing? And we've got to ask ourselves, what is the meaning of citizenship? And if we are going to use an algorithm or a technology like AI that not only impacts your identity and gives you a digital identity, but also impacts the meaning of citizenship, the meaning of access, the meaning of justice, the meaning of identity, the meaning of belonging, all of those things have an impact on who we are and how we feel as citizens of a country, citizens of the world. And AI can change that either in a good way or it can challenge it in very negative ways. And it's really about future-proofing. I always say future-proofing, looking at how we build a better tomorrow, but doing the work today.
Love that. So a big part of this, Renée, is obviously that we all have to do our own work to get educated on these various issues. And as I've been scrolling through LinkedIn and people have been asking a lot of questions about how do I get started? What are some good books in the technology space? Some videos I can be watching, some movies I can be watching, just to start getting educated on AI ethics, ways that I can get involved to help reduce bias in AI. Are there any books or YouTube videos or things that you would think would be a good way to kind of start the thinking?
Certainly. I would start with Kathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction. Very powerful. She's an ace mathematician. She's a data activist. She's an AI ethicist. I mean, she's just the all-round, intellectual powerhouse. Excellent book. And then I would suggest Algorithms of Oppression, another great book by Dr. Sophia Noble. Artificial Unintelligence. That's amazing text, Meredith Broussard. Ruha Benjamin's Race for Technology or Race Against Technology. Don't hold me on the name, but Ruha is brilliant when she speaks about how implicit bias slips through the back door of design optimization. And she really is excellent when she speaks about benevolent technology and how we think we're designing things to make groups and communities better, but we're just bringing our bias in or our assumptions or presumptions, thinking this is what is best for a particular group. And we've got to think about that and check that as well. And then, of course, Joy Bulamwini, her work when it comes to gendered a gendered approach to facial recognition, and her research is there as well. And there's also a recent documentary that looks at the coded gaze, I think it is. And I think if you start with those few texts, you are going to really catapult yourself consciously and really dig deep into how these things impact us in ways that we have not thought about just as yet. And it makes you a better data scientist, it makes you a better technologist, and it makes you an aware citizen and a better consumer when it comes to data as well, and when it comes to technology, and when it comes to anything that's new and emerging like artificial intelligence.
I love that. And Renee, you're on fire, because for those listening to the podcast, I didn't prepare Renee with any sort of questions. And I just asked her like, oh, what are some good resources? And you just like listed off like all these great books right off the bat, like they were right there in front of you. So it's so cool that you just have those ready to go.
You know, those are the ones that I read, within the last year that really laid it out very, very nicely. And I think anyone who picks any of those books up, just one, is going to be better as they move forward in their profession.
No doubt. And I actually just picked up Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology. I'm in the first chapter. It takes time to go through those books. There's a lot to them. It's meaty.
It does. But that's an excellent text. It lays it out, and it sort of designs a framework for you. It questions you at the same time, and it gives you a sense of advocacy, activism, that, I need to do better. And it gives you a great sense of awareness. It's like you've just sat down in her class at Princeton, and then you just leave saying, you know what? These are the things that I need to do. These are the things I need to check. These are the things I need to understand. And the next time I sit at the table, these are the points that I'm going to share with my team to ensure we're on top of it. She really allows you to bring your A game to the design table when it comes to questions of systemic racism, institutional prejudices and bias, and the kinds of disparities we have in society that you don't want to replicate in your design.
These books are time consuming. There's not a novel where you can just flip through it. I mean, there is so much going on. And these books are like steak. You have to like cut in slowly and just really absorb it, chew it in very, very slowly, because it takes a lot of work to go through these books, but their reward is huge. Like the insights you'll gain and awareness for certain topics that you never even imagined are going to come up. And you walk away from these passages totally like enlightened in so many ways.
Well, I think it's really important to read the text. And if you can't read the text, this is why you have these podcasts. So I think a lot of people have said to me, when I listen to you, Renee, I get all of it in one, and it's so much easier because, you hit the key point. So I think it's a collaborative work because some of us read the books and we're able to share with you the many ideas and to credit the thinkers behind it, and really to push that thinking forward, and to really amplify the voices of the academics as well. So although I'm in an academic space doing my research at Columbia University, I think it's also important that my voice is heard. And that is one of the reasons why I continue to have these interactions, to do the podcast, to do the interviews, because there are many people who don't have access to the books, who may not have the time. Things are happening so quickly. And, even our attention span has changed because of technology. Not everyone can sit down for a week, or, some people may listen to the audiobook, but, it's about having the conversations as well. And people absorb information differently. Some people absorb it as they read it. Some people absorb it from a podcast like this, and they take the message and they're able to put that message to work in real time.
That's why I love, you've been so active doing webinars and workshops online so that people can engage in that way. Because you're right, not everyone wants to read a book, but some people would rather just listen to a discussion. And you've been hosting all these various events, being invited to speak at all these different panels. So I want to thank you for being on DataTalk to share your wisdom with us. And can you talk a little bit before we end about your work with Urban AI?
So Urban AI is brand new. I started it before COVID-19, and you would appreciate, because of that pandemic, how it slowed everything down. Urban AI is about bringing AI into an urban space, using AI to bring solutions to the challenges that we see, everything from public safety to food security to climate security to healthcare to communications and transport. So ensuring that AI is used to make life easier and make resources more accessible. It also has a heavy component that I want to develop when it comes to homicide and violence prevention, and using it particularly in this new context where there are calls to defund the police, to help reimagine what policing is supposed to be as we move forward. So many of the tools that I intend to develop would look at building up the presence of the community in law enforcement, and ensuring that communities have a critical role to play in the design of law enforcement strategies, whether or not they're administrative or they're operational, but bringing the communities in. So community-led policing, we've had community policing, but we've never had community-led policing. And also using it to reduce trauma. I'm very passionate about reducing intergenerational trauma that often leads to violence, and intergenerational anger, something that we see as well, free-floating anger, and really looking at the relationships between different groups and different cultures when it comes to law enforcement, to ensure also that we are not, because one of the things I fear, because of this call to defund the police, because we've got to reimagine policing, there may be an over-reliance, what we call techno-solutionism, on digital tools, because more digital things that pulls the individual officer away and say we're now using a digital officer. We don't want to create a digital chokehold. We've seen the chokehold that was used, and we've seen the chokeholds that have been used in many communities of color that have resulted in the death or, a fatality when it comes to our Black and brown men. We don't want to create a digital chokehold that ensures that kind of violence is now replicated in a digital way. We've seen we've seen that, individuals with a criminal record, how those things stick with you because of something like the internet, and the inability to really get your information off the internet, and how many families have been impacted, how many individuals who cannot get an apartment because they may have had a prior conviction, and because a landlord or an employer is going to Google something that's still there that may not even be part of your existence right now. So Urban AI also has an element that I want to take AI into the urban schools to ensure that we get that diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when I talk about diversity, it's not just about Black or brown people involved in technology. It's about disability. It's about gender. It's about just all of the differences that we have. And I think we are more, we need to celebrate those things. Sometimes we look at differences as something negative, but we need to celebrate that. So Urban AI is just ensuring that AI has an urban feel to it, mixing AI with urban culture and what I call a new code of the streets. And that's what I want to do with urban AI.
Oh, I love that. For those that want to get connected with your work to find out where you're speaking next, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn is always great. I'm also on every other social media platform, and you can also link me on Columbia's website. My email is there, and you can send me an email if you need me to speak, if you want to just have a conversation, if there's something that you're doing that needs just a little more a depth, or you're looking for that awareness. I'm here to offer whatever I can, just to advance all of us in this game called humanity.
Awesome. Renée, thank you so much for being on DataTalk.
Thank you so much. It was fantastic. Take care, Mike.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of DataTalk. We share out new episodes every single week, and you can find the full catalog of previous episodes as well as YouTube videos by going to the Experian News blog. The URL is just experian.com/DataTalk. And as always, we love hearing from our community, so if you have any comments or suggestions for future shows, please reach out. You can find us on Twitter at Experian Data Lab, or you can always reach out to me directly. My email is michael.delgado@experian.com. Take care, and we'll chat next week.